we want to have a sexy person very romantically interested in us, even though that is not our reality. And it's not fun if you can't even sort of pretend that it's not happening to you in addition to the main character that you're following. Hello lovelies, and welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about something that has been sort of gnawing at me, and I hope that this will help readers in particular, but writers as well. This is a question I've been asking ever since I've read The Astonishing Color of After. I had mentioned that I felt that I was projecting onto the situation and a lot of the very emotional aspects of the book. it's just been gnawing at me, and so I thought I'd make a video on it and write down a lot of notes, and so I'm gonna discuss about this question of whether or not a character is a character or an avatar. Now, I've complained about milquetoast or very bland main characters before, particularly as it works with young adult novels and romance. But I've also mentioned that there is a lot of psychology that goes into very sort of paper doll characters, and there are reasons why they work so well. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about sort of how you can figure out whether or not a character that you're interacting with is an avatar or if it's a real character. So here we go. Typically, when you read a book, you've either really related to the main character, or you start to wonder whether or not this was really the book for you, or if you were relating, or if you felt seen by this author. If they don't really have a strong personality, this character is less of a character and more of an avatar. And no, I'm not talking about the movies, the TV show, etc. What I am talking about when I talk about an avatar character is a character that doesn't have enough to be substantially a person on its own. So it is an aesthetic representation, or a golem with no soul, or a doll that the audience can sort of just pretend to be for a while. Gamers in particular are familiar with avatars. We have games especially that will let you create your own avatars because you want to live in that particular fantasy. But historically, there have been avatars that are pre-made for us that we don't make. Especially the early developers and game creators were very divided on this issue of the quote silent protagonist. For example, Link in the very first Zelda game was a silent protagonist and an avatar. Chrono in Chrono Trigger was also more of an avatar than a real character. The early Mario games with Mario and Luigi not really having much of a distinguished personality or any sort of dialogue. We don't get these characters' personalities, especially when we talk about Link and Mario, until the later games when we have cutscenes, when we have greater stories and more dialogue. Mario gets a voice. He starts to become more of a substantial character rather than an avatar. The pro of this is that the player can put themselves in the adventure. They are Link, they are Mario, they are Chrono. We get taken on that adventure and we're able to slip our own personality, our own consciousness into a rather blank canvas. The con end of it is that the character has no real character. We don't get a deeper layer of how they fit into this world. And for the early games especially, it didn't matter too much. Chrono Trigger is a really interesting case in which Chrono, though a silent protagonist, does interact with the world at large because it is more of a role-play type game than an action platformer, as the other two that I've mentioned are. And so he does have a little bit more of a stake, and he has a little bit more of an influence by his actions in the world, but ultimately he has no dialogue. He has relationships with characters that aren't necessarily spelled out. So he's a little bit of a funny case, but ultimately he's still an avatar. Even with the small caveats, you can sort of understand why these characters in video games in particular are not really characters. They're named avatars. They're really just a doll or a figure, a sprite for us to follow and visualize. We see this sort of concept in books, particularly in romance, fantasy, and young adult, and there are reasons for that. For romance, it's pretty straightforward. Most romances are written with the intention of having a pure escapist fantasy, and that's not necessarily fun if the character is too much of a character and we as the audience can't put ourselves in that situation. We want to have a sexy person very romantically interested in us, even though that is not our reality. It's not fun if you can't even sort of pretend that it's not happening to you in addition to the main character that you're following. Fantasy stories that do adopt a more avatar-like main character have a very similar thing. It's not fun if you can't go on the adventure yourself. So you're able to better embed yourself into the story rather than being taken on a story. For young adult, it's a little bit more caveated. Typically, what YA is meant to do is to empower our emerging adults. And so the reason why you may adopt, or a writer may adopt, a more avatar main character is so that our young adult readers can put themselves into these particular situations and then feel like that they can go out and do this themselves. It's less of a fantasy and more of a vehicle for the audience to then go and do great deeds. All of this is ultimately projection of a self onto an avatar. I want to discuss projection, the word projection, really quickly before we move on, because it's rather important. If you look at the term as defined in psychology, it goes something like, projection is a defense mechanism in which an individual will attribute negative characteristics in themselves onto other people. Now, this might, for example, be a liar might assume that everyone else lies, or that someone else is lying in a particular circumstance because in that circumstance, that's what that person would do. When we're talking about projection in writing, I'm not necessarily talking about just the negative attributes. I'm also talking about the positive. We're talking about this as a projection of a person and everything as a whole. In fact, a lot of the time, it is actually the positive attributes that you're projecting onto a particular story avatar. So I'm using this, and I want to clarify that I'm using this because most people that I've seen review and on YouTube and in the literary, writing and reading world, they seem to understand what projection is when we discuss it. But I wanted to stress that I'm not talking about purely the psychological term. I'm talking about the way that we use it in reading and literature. So why do I make the difference and the distinction? Because projection, whether or not it is positive or negative, is essentially what we are doing. And the ability to project onto a character, actually, it arguably makes the audience closer to the story as a whole. After all, you are in the story. It's a very easy way to reach to a large audience, a large number of people who come from vastly different backgrounds and mindsets without offending them too much. However, we also need to be cognizant about what's going on with any particular story and to then assess what is happening with our interaction with the story. We don't want to confuse ourselves with the avatar. And I do see this a lot with reviewers. I've come up with a short list of questions that may help to distance yourself from the character and then perhaps better assess what is happening in your interaction with the story material. Number one, ask yourself, what do I really know about this character? And then, how do I know this? Number two, what parts are different from who I know that I am? Number three, what parts are similar to who I know I am? Number four, are there things about the plot or the circumstances that are particular to this world? If not, is the author trying to express a social or political point or capture an emotion or experience? So for example of how I use this to pull apart my experience with The Astonishing Color of After, I have my answers. So number one, what do I really know about this character? I know that Lee is a high schooler in the United States. She is grieving the loss of her mother. She is half Taiwanese, half white. She is estranged from her Taiwanese family. She is an artist and she is not supported by her father. She is confused about her love life and she has a fiery temper. How do I know this? All of these points are very clearly stated in the first act of the book. We understand her love and her focus on colors. We also get the plot point of she's preparing for a big art show. We also get a lot of the arguments and interactions with her parents that really highlight her fiery temper. Going on to question 2. What points are different from myself? I am nearly 30 years old. No one in my family has died recently. I am a writer, I am married, and last point, mostly I am a chill person. I don't quite go off the rails as Lee does. 3. What parts are similar? I am half Asian and half white. I am also estranged from my Japanese family. I am an artist of a sort. I'm a writer and I am unsupported by my family. And then number 4, are there things about the plot or circumstances that are particular to this world? Because we're dealing with mostly a world that is in real life, a world that is very similar to our own, yes and no. We get the magical realist element of the bird and the dreams and so on and so forth. Those are very different and very particular to the experience of the book. However, we do get a lot of specifically Taiwanese culture that doesn't play out in the larger spectrum or in the plot of the world. So there's a yes and no with that. The other half of this question is, if not, is the author trying to express social or political points or trying to capture an emotional experience? And this is absolutely yes. It's very clear that Emily Exarpan is trying to capture the stigma and the gravity of mental illness, as well as the death of a parent, estranged family, the drama of teen life and first love, also trying to express the Asian American experience and perhaps even the mixed blood or like the Hapa experience as well. And then also the experience of finding or rediscovering family roots. Now, with all these questions in mind, I was really able to isolate what it was about the book, particularly in sort of the later half of the book, that I felt I was projecting onto. So me and Lee are not very similar at all. I wasn't projecting onto the character. I was actually projecting onto the plot, which can happen. And the reason why the plot and the experiences ended up being more of an Avatar-like experience rather than real novel plot points, I guess, for lack of a better term, is because we didn't get an in-depth exploration of these points, which often happens in Avatar characters. We don't get a huge exploration of the characters themselves or their arcs, and so we end up filling those gaps in with our own experiences. I was projecting onto the plot, and particularly the cultural aspects of The Astonishing Color of After's plot. And I do want to stress at this point that I'm not saying that if a book or a character has Avatar-like elements, that it's automatically bad. While I personally don't necessarily like to be able to project myself onto a plot or a character, it is a tool. It is very much a way for us to interact with a story, a plot, any sort of thing. But what I am saying is that we shouldn't compliment a book or a story or anything like that because of quote-unquote great character development or great characterizations, when really we're just projecting ourselves onto the characters. Frankly, it's not good characterization, but sometimes that's not the point. To pull this back into the video game example, in the original Zelda, the very first one, you would never say that Link was a great character. He has no character development. He went on a great adventure, but he doesn't have any dialogue, he has no feelings, he hasn't any thoughts, there's nothing. Everything that you felt while playing Zelda or watching someone else play Zelda, those were your thoughts and your feelings. That was your frustration and your feeling of accomplishment. But the sprite didn't do that. He doesn't really have any interaction with the world other than killing a bunch of random mobs and gathering items and experiencing the world, but he doesn't react. So there's no character. Does that mean that it was a bad game? Does that mean that it was a bad story? No. It just means that the characterization wasn't there, and that was a very deliberate choice. All in all, when you are reading, I think that asking those 5 questions will actually really help distance yourself enough and make yourself look at any sort of story that you're interacting with and understand why you feel close or distant from a character. As I said, personally, I don't like it when I get a very milquetoast main character because that is my preference. I like to read about characters and their own struggles and not necessarily get caught up in sort of an echo chamber type thing when I'm just projecting myself onto a character, into a story. I would rather see the reactions of other people with very different thoughts and expressions than my own and see how it works out for them. But again, that's not always the point, and that's not always the best way to get across to people. So I hope that this helped you in some way. Trying to do more of these sort of talks and dives into the reading and the writing craft, because I think that they are important, and I think that having more specific talks rather than just going through the broad strokes will help readers who are more advanced and want to have a deeper understanding of the stories that they're interacting with. I guess that's it for now. I hope that this won't be too long of a video. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button and the notification bell down below if you haven't already for content that will be similar but better than this. And yeah, I guess I want to thank you guys again for being here. We're almost at 200 subscribers so quick. So share videos that you think other people would like. Help me grow this community. I really enjoy interacting with all of you and hearing your thoughts about everything. It's really great. And I guess I will see you in the next video. All right, bye.
She said it will never go away. I know there is nothing left to say. Can we try to hold on just for now, even if we don't know how to show them what we're all about?